The sound of knuckles rapping against wood echoed in the silent morning air, a knock that seemed much louder in the otherwise still neighborhood. It was the kind of knock that froze you in place, made your heart race, and left you wondering what was waiting on the other side of the door. Inside the small, quaint house, Mr. Clarence's weathered hands paused midway as he prepared his morning coffee. He wasn't expecting any visitors, especially not this early in the day. His life was one of routine, days blending together in peaceful, if somewhat lonely, obscurity. But this knock was different. It was urgent. From the living room, the little girl, Amara, looked up with wide, curious eyes. She had come over just like she did yesterday to check on the old man after their impromptu birthday dinner. She had found in him an unexpected friend, someone who had quietly opened his door to her warmth and energy. The two had connected over a shared meal, an odd but wholesome pair, a little black girl with pigtails and a spark of life in her, and an elderly white man, solitary and forgotten by most of the town. But today, the atmosphere was different. The door, though sturdy, seemed fragile in the face of the insistent knocking, and behind it, the shadowy figures of two men were barely visible through the frosted glass. Clarence's heart thudded in his chest as his mind raced. Who could it be? What could they want? The knock came again, more forceful this time. Amara stood up, her small body still, yet she seemed attuned to the tension in the air. Her voice broke the silence, soft and unsure. "Mr. Clarence, do you think they're here for me?" Her words struck a chord deep within him, for he'd wondered the same thing. After all, they hadn't done anything wrong. They had just shared a simple birthday dinner the night before, enjoying each other's company. But something in his gut told him that this wasn't going to be an ordinary visit. The third knock came, louder still, demanding an answer. Reluctantly, Mr. Clarence moved toward the door, his legs feeling heavier with each step. He hesitated as his fingers hovered above the door handle, glancing back at Amara, who was now standing just behind him, her face a mix of worry and confusion. "Stay back," he whispered to her. "Let me see who it is." With a slow, measured breath, he turned the handle and pulled the door open, revealing two police officers standing on his front porch. Their uniforms were crisp, their faces serious. They didn't bother with pleasantries. The taller of the two, Officer Ramirez, immediately stepped forward. "Good morning, sir. We received a call about some unusual activity here last night. Mind if we come in?" Clarence blinked, unsure of how to respond. His eyes flicked to Amara, who was peeking around the corner of the doorway. The officers followed his gaze, and that's when their expressions subtly shifted. The older man couldn't quite place it, but there was something in their eyes, a mix of concern, curiosity, and suspicion. "Unusual activity," Clarence finally echoed, his voice gravelly with age and a hint of fear. "What kind of activity?" The officer's gaze was steady, unwavering. "A neighbor reported seeing a young girl coming into your house late last evening, and there was another car seen lurking around the area. We're here to make sure everything's all right." A cold chill ran down Clarence's spine. He had known this town long enough to understand how quickly people jumped to conclusions, especially when it came to someone like him, a reclusive old man who kept to himself. His neighbors had always been distant, if not outright suspicious. And Amara, well, her presence had been noticed. A black girl, with no relation to him, coming into his home. Of course, someone would get the wrong idea. He cursed under his breath. "We didn't do anything wrong." Amara spoke up, her voice firm despite her young age. "We just had dinner for his birthday. That's all." Officer Ramirez glanced down at her, his expression softening just a fraction. "I'm sure that's true, sweetheart," he said, his tone gentler now. "But we just need to ask some questions, okay? Make sure everything's fine." Clarence stepped back, allowing the officers to enter. The small house, though cozy, suddenly felt suffocating as they walked in, taking in the surroundings as if they were inspecting every inch for evidence of something darker. As the officers began their questions, Clarence couldn't help but feel like the world had turned upside down in the span of just a few hours. Yesterday had been such a good day. He had never expected anyone to celebrate his birthday, especially not a child like Amara. The joy she had brought into his life, even if just for a single evening, had made him feel alive again. And now, that innocence was being tainted by suspicion. "What's this all about?" Clarence asked, his voice rising with frustration. "We didn't do anything wrong." The other officer, a younger man with a more serious demeanor, finally spoke. "It's just procedures, sir. There's been some reports of a man driving around town in a black SUV, following children. We had to check in, make sure she was safe." A black SUV. The words hung in the air, and Clarence's mind raced back to the night before. After dinner, when Amara had gone home, he had noticed something strange. A car had been parked near the end of the street, its headlights off but engine running. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, chalking it up to someone waiting for a friend. But now, with the police standing in his living room, the pieces began to fall into place. Amara spoke up again, her voice small but clear. "I saw that car too, last night. It was following me when I left. I ran home." Clarence's heart sank as the realization hit him. This wasn't just about him and Amara. Something much more sinister had been lurking in the shadows, something that neither of them had fully understood until now. Officer Ramirez exchanged a glance with his partner before turning back to Clarence. "We're going to need a bit more information, sir." And with that, the simple birthday dinner that had brought a spark of joy into Clarence's life suddenly spiraled into a much deeper, more dangerous situation than either of them could have ever imagined. The sun had barely started to rise over the small town of Carson Springs, casting a golden light on the quiet streets. For most of the town's residents, this day would be like any other, but for two people, it would mark the beginning of something unexpected. Clarence's world. The weight of loneliness. Mr. Clarence's morning always started the same way. He'd sit on his sagging porch, staring at the horizon with his hands wrapped around a chipped coffee cup. His once sturdy hands, now spotted with age and riddled with arthritis, held the warmth of the coffee as if it was his only companion. He had lived in Carson Springs for over 50 years, longer than anyone could remember. The once bustling carpenter who built half the houses in town was now a ghost of his former self. His house sat at the edge of the town, where the streets were quiet and the neighbors seldom waved. It wasn't that they disliked him. It was more that they had forgotten about him. After his wife, Margaret, passed away a decade ago, Clarence had drifted into the background of life. Margaret had been the outgoing one, the person who kept their home lively with laughter and visitors. Without her, Clarence found himself slowly slipping into a life of isolation. The house reflected his state of being: peeling paint, a rusty mailbox, and a garden overrun with weeds. It wasn't that he didn't care. He simply didn't have the energy or the will to keep it up anymore. His days were spent in silence, with only the ticking of the old grandfather clock and the occasional chatter of the neighborhood children in the distance as his soundtrack. Sometimes he'd watch them play from his porch, his heart aching with a longing he didn't fully understand. Clarence had children of his own once, 2 sons, both grown now, living their own lives far away. They called occasionally, out of obligation more than genuine interest. And on the rare occasion they visited, their interactions felt stilted, more out of duty than love. The distance between them wasn't just geographical. It was emotional, a gap that had widened over the years. When Margaret died, so did the glue that held the family together. His 75th birthday had come and gone, unmarked by anyone. No cards, no phone calls. The loneliness felt heavier than usual that day, wrapping itself around him like an unwanted blanket. He had resigned himself to a quiet end, forgotten and alone, until a voice broke through the silence. Amara's world, the spark of curiosity. Amara was 7 years old and filled with more curiosity than most people could handle. She lived with her mother, Lisa, in a small apartment complex on the other side of town. Their apartment wasn't much, just a two-bedroom unit with thin walls and creaky floors, but to Amara, it was home. She was used to the sound of neighbors arguing, the smell of fried food drifting through the hallways, and the constant hum of city life outside their window. Her mother worked long hours at a local diner, often leaving Amara to entertain herself after school. Lisa did everything she could to provide for her daughter, but there was never enough time, never enough money. Still, Amara's spirit was unbreakable. She found joy in the little things, the smell of fresh rain, the way the sun set behind the distant hills, or the stories her mom would tell her about their hometown in Alabama before they moved to Carson Springs. Amara's world was small, but it was filled with possibility. She had friends at school, a love for adventure, and a boundless imagination. Yet she also had a keen sense of empathy for others, something that was rare in children her age. She noticed things that others didn't, like how her classmate, Jenna, always seemed to have the same sandwich for lunch every day because her family couldn't afford more. Or how old Mr. Clarence, the man who lived near her bus stop, always sat on his porch, staring off into the distance like he was waiting for something or someone. To the rest of the town, Mr. Clarence was invisible, but to Amara, he was a mystery. Every day, as her school bus rumbled past his house, she catched glimpses of him. He never moved from that spot, always sitting in the same chair, his hands wrapped around that same old coffee cup. He looked so lonely, and though Amara didn't know why, she felt a pull to him. One day, on her way home from school, she decided to stop. It was a bold move for a 7-year-old, but Amara wasn't the type to shy away from her instincts. She walked up to the edge of his yard and stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. Mr. Clarence hadn't noticed her yet, his eyes focused on the distance, as though he was lost in a different time. "Hi," she finally said, her small voice cutting through the silence like a knife. Clarence startled slightly, his eyes snapping back to the present. He hadn't heard a voice that wasn't on the television or the phone in what felt like weeks. He looked down at the little girl standing at the edge of his lawn, her big brown eyes staring up at him with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Hello there," he replied, his voice gravelly and unsure. Amara took a step closer, emboldened by his response. "Why are you always sitting here by yourself?" The question caught Clarence off guard. No one had ever asked him that before, not even his own children. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. How could he explain a lifetime of loneliness to a child? Amara seemed to sense his hesitation, so she spoke again. "My name's Amara. My mom says I asked too many questions, but I just like to know things, like why you're always alone." Clarence chuckled softly at her bluntness. It was the first time he'd laughed in months. "Well, Amara," he began slowly, "I guess I just don't have anyone to sit with me." Amara furrowed her brow, as if the concept of someone having no one was completely foreign to her. "That's silly," she said with the innocent wisdom of a child. "Everyone should have someone." Clarence smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Maybe so, but sometimes people forget about you." She tilted her head, considering his words carefully. "Today's your birthday, isn't it?" Clarence blinked in surprise. How could she possibly know that? He hadn't told anyone. The only person who ever remembered his birthday was Margaret, and she had been gone for 10 years. He had stopped marking the occasion himself, as it had become just another reminder of who he had lost. "How did you know?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. "I just knew," she said confidently, "and no one should spend their birthday alone. Do you want to have dinner with me?" Clarence didn't know how to respond. No one had offered to share a meal with him in years, and here was this little girl, full of life, extending a hand to him. A part of him wanted to say no, to retreat back into his solitary existence, but another part, the part that missed companionship and warmth, made him nod his head. "I'd like that," he said quietly, as if afraid the moment would slip away if he spoke too loudly. Amara's face lit up with a smile so wide that it seemed to brighten the whole street. "I'll be back later with dinner." She called over her shoulder as she skipped away, leaving Clarence sitting on his porch, wondering if he'd just imagined the whole thing. For the first time in years, something stirred inside Clarence, hope, and though he didn't know it yet, that simple dinner invitation would set off a chain of events that would change both of their lives forever. The dinner that night was something Mr. Clarence would remember for the rest of his days. Amara showed up at his doorstep around 6 p.m., her small hands clutching a plastic bag filled with food. It wasn't anything fancy, just some leftover fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and biscuits that her mother had packed from the diner where she worked. But to Clarence, it might as well have been a feast. They sat down at his old rickety dining table, the kind that creaked with every movement. The room was dimly lit by a single bowl hanging overhead, casting long shadows on the walls. As they ate, Amara talked about her school, her favorite books, and her dreams of one day becoming an astronaut. Clarence mostly listened, nodding along and smiling at her youthful enthusiasm. Her energy was infectious, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was simply going through the motions of life. He felt connected to something again. The two of them sat there long after the food was gone, talking and laughing as if they had known each other for years. And for a little while, the weight of Clarence's loneliness seemed to lift. It was as if Amara's presence had breathed life back into his tired old soul. But as the night wore on, the world outside Clarence's house was far from still. The black SUV, a dark presence in the shadows. Unbeknownst to Clarence and Amara, someone had been watching. At the far end of the street, nestled in the shadows where the streetlights barely reached, a black SUV sat parked, its engine idling softly. It had been there for the past few hours, its driver hidden behind tinted windows, observing the small house where Clarence lived. Inside the vehicle, a man sat in the driver's seat, his hands gripping the wheel tightly as he stared at the house. He wasn't from around Carson Springs, and his presence in the town was something no one had yet noticed. The man was careful, methodical in his movements. He had learned how to blend in, how to disappear in plain sight. He had been following Amara for days, ever since he first saw her walking home from school. There was something about her innocence, her bright smile, that had caught his attention. To him, she was just another opportunity, and he was patient. As Clarence and Amara laughed inside, the man watched through the narrow gap between the curtains. He saw the way the old man smiled at the girl, the way they seemed so at ease in each other's company. It disgusted him, but it also gave him a sense of control. He knew that no one would expect him to be there, lurking in the darkness. No one ever noticed the predator until it was too late. He had no intention of acting tonight. Tonight was just for observation, for studying their routines. But soon, he would make his move. Amara's journey home, the first sign of danger. After their meal, Clarence offered to walk Amara home, but she refused. She was independent, she told him, and her mother would worry if she didn't make it home soon. Clarence reluctantly agreed, but he stood on his porch and watched as she walked down the street, her small figure disappearing into the night. As Amara turned the corner, she felt a strange chill run down her spine. It was the kind of chill that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. She stopped for a moment, glancing around, but the street was empty. The houses were dark, their inhabitants likely asleep or settled in for the night. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching her. She quickened her pace, her footsteps echoing in the quiet night. Her apartment complex wasn't far, just a few blocks away. But tonight the distance felt longer. She glanced over her shoulder, her eyes scanning the empty street. Nothing. She was just being paranoid, she told herself. It was late, and the shadows always played tricks on her mind. But then, as she turned onto the main road, she saw it. A pair of headlights, slowly creeping up the street behind her. They were distant at first, barely noticeable, but as the car drew closer, her heart began to race. It wasn't unusual for cars to pass by this time of night, but there was something off about this one. It wasn't speeding past like the other cars usually did. It was moving slowly, deliberately. Amara's heart thudded in her chest as the black SUV pulled up alongside her. For a moment, it kept pace with her, the windows too dark to see who was inside. She could feel eyes on her, watching her every move. She swallowed hard, her mind racing with fear. Then, without warning, the car sped up, leaving her in the dust. The sound of the engine roared in her ears, and she stood there frozen, her legs trembling beneath her. For a second, she thought she was safe, that maybe the driver was just some random person driving too slow. But as the SUV turned the corner up ahead, it slowed down again. It was waiting for her. Amara's instincts kicked in. She turned and sprinted down the street, her shoes pounding against the pavement. She didn't know what else to do. She didn't have a phone on her. Her mother didn't let her carry one yet, and there was no one around to help. The only thing she could think to do was run. She darted down an alleyway, hoping to lose the SUV. Her small figure weaved between trash cans and overgrown bushes, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She could hear the distant hum of the SUV's engine, but it wasn't following her down the alley. For a moment, she thought she had lost it. But then she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. Amara's heart leaped into her throat. She whipped around, her eyes wide with fear, but there was no one there. The alley was empty, just as it had been a moment ago. Her mind was playing tricks on her, she told herself. She was safe. She had to be. Still, she didn't stop running until she reached her apartment complex. She flew through the front door and up the stairs to her unit, her hands shaking as she fumbled with her key. When she finally made it inside, she locked the door behind her and leaned against it, her chest heaving with relief. Her mother, Lisa, was sitting on the couch, watching TV. She looked up as Amara entered, her brow furrowed in concern. "You okay, sweetie? You look like you've seen a ghost." Amara shook her head, trying to steady her breathing. "I'm fine," she lied, not wanting to worry her mother. Just tired from walking." Lisa nodded, though she didn't seem entirely convinced. "Well, go get ready for bed. You've got school in the morning." Amara nodded and slipped into her room, but sleep didn't come easily that night. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the events of the evening. The dinner with Mr. Clarence had been so nice, so simple, and yet something had felt off ever since she left his house. She couldn't shake the image of the black SUV creeping along the street, or the sound of footsteps that weren't there. She didn't know it yet, but that night was only the beginning. Something far more dangerous was lurking in the shadows, waiting for its chance to strike. Clarence's sleepless night, the first spark of worry. Back at his house, Clarence sat on his porch long after Amara had left, his mind filled with thoughts of the little girl. She had brought a sense of joy back into his life that he hadn't felt in years. For a brief moment, he had felt like his old self again, like the man he used to be before loneliness had consumed him. But as the night grew darker, a sense of unease settled over him. Something about the way Amara had left, the way she had glanced back at him before disappearing around the corner, it had stirred a feeling of protectiveness in him. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now, sitting alone in the dark, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He had noticed the black SUV earlier in the evening, parked at the end of the street. It wasn't unusual for cars to park there, but this one had stayed longer than most. And then, just as Amara had left, it had disappeared. He hadn't thought much of it then, but now he wasn't so sure. Clarence stood up, his joints creaking in protest as he made his way inside. He locked the door behind him, something he hadn't done in years. Carson Springs was a quiet town, the kind of place where people didn't lock their doors at night. But tonight felt different. He glanced out the window one last time before heading to bed. The street was empty, the black SUV long gone. But the unease lingered. Something was coming, something dark and dangerous. He could feel it in his bones. And in the morning, that feeling would prove to be all too real. Amara woke up the next morning feeling as though a heavy weight had settled in her chest. She had tossed and turned all night, her dreams filled with dark figures and the ominous hum of engines creeping through the shadows. The black SUV had lodged itself in her mind, and despite her best efforts to push the fear aside, it clung to her like a shadow. But there was school to go to, and she knew better than to complain about nightmares to her mother, who already worked 2 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads. Lisa, always up before dawn, had already left for the diner by the time Amara got up. On the kitchen counter, she found the usual note, short, sweet, and reassuring. "Have a good day at school, baby. There's cereal in the cupboard. Love, Mom." The small sense of normalcy helped Amara get through her morning routine. By the time she left the house, the bright sunlight had managed to chase away the lingering fear. The streets of Carson Springs were alive with the sound of morning routines, parents rushing their kids to school, people honking as they headed to work, and the occasional barking dog. For a while, everything seemed fine. But even in the daylight, the memory of that black SUV gnawed at her. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching her. And now, as she made her way to school, she caught herself glancing over her shoulder more than once, her senses on high alert. Still, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Clarence's morning. An unexpected visit. While Amara tried to settle into her school day, Clarence woke up to a morning that was anything but routine. The old man rarely had visitors, and his days usually passed in the same predictable rhythm. Morning coffee, a slow shuffle to the mailbox, and maybe some time spent in the garden. But today, there was a knock on the door. Clarence frowned as he shuffled to answer it, the sound of the knock jarring in the otherwise silent house. He wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened the door, he found 2 police officers standing on his porch. His heart skipped a beat. The officers were young, dressed in crisp uniforms that looked out of place against the weathered backdrop of Clarence's home. One of them, a tall man with a serious expression, held a notepad. The other, a woman with kind eyes, stood just behind him, hands clasped in front of her. "Mr. Clarence?" the male officer asked. Clarence nodded, his mind racing. Why were the police here? Had something happened to Amara? His stomach churned at the thought. "We'd like to ask you a few questions," the officer said, flipping open his notepad. "Do you know a young girl named Amara?" Clarence's heart sank. "Yes, of course. She had dinner with me last night. Is she all right?" The officers exchanged a glance, their expressions unreadable. "Amara's fine," the woman officer assured him, stepping forward. "But we've had some concerns reported about a vehicle in this neighborhood. A black SUV." Clarence's blood ran cold. The black SUV. "We received a report about the vehicle being seen near Amara's home," the male officer explained. "And it was also spotted in the area around your house last night." Clarence felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He had noticed the SUV, but he hadn't thought much of it at the time. Now, he cursed himself for not being more vigilant. "I saw it too," he admitted, his voice shaky. "It was parked at the end of the street for a long time. I didn't think anything of it. But now." The officers nodded, jotting down notes. "We're looking into it," the male officer said. "For now, we just wanted to make sure you and Amara are aware. It could be nothing, but we don't want to take any chances." Clarence swallowed hard. "What do you think it is? Do you think someone's following her?" The woman officer hesitated before answering. "We're not sure yet, Mr. Clarence, but we advise you to be careful. If you see that vehicle again, or anything unusual, please call us immediately." Clarence nodded, feeling the weight of their warning settle heavily on his shoulders. As the officers left, he stood on the porch for a long moment, staring down the street. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pavement, but the black SUV was nowhere to be seen. The stranger in the SUV, his calculated move. As Clarence and the police spoke, The man in the black SUV was already several miles away, parked in a secluded area on the outskirts of Carson Springs. The SUV's dark-tinted windows concealed him from view, but inside, his eyes were fixed on his phone, scrolling through photos of Amara. He had taken them over the past few days, capturing her as she walked to school, played in the park, and even during her dinner with Clarence. To him, it was all part of the game, a twisted game he had played before. He liked to observe his targets first, learn their habits, and study their routines. It was all about control, about the slow buildup of tension before he finally made his move. He leaned back in the driver's seat, a smirk playing on his lips. Everything was going according to plan. The police didn't scare him. They never did. He knew how to stay hidden, how to disappear when the heat got too close. It wasn't time to act yet. Not just yet. But soon. Amara's growing unease. An encounter at school. At school, Amara tried to focus on her lessons, but her mind kept wandering. Every time a car passed by the classroom window, she flinched, expecting to see the black SUV waiting outside. She hadn't told anyone about it, not her mother, not even her best friend, Kayla. Part of her didn't want to believe that it was something to be worried about. Maybe it had just been a coincidence. Maybe she was overreacting. But deep down, she knew something wasn't right. During lunch, Amara sat with Kayla at their usual table in the school cafeteria, picking at her food, while Kayla chattered on about the latest drama with their classmates. Amara tried to listen, but her mind was elsewhere. She glanced up at the windows, half expecting to see the black SUV parked outside. "Hey, you okay?" Kayla asked, noticing Amara's distracted state. Amara forced a smile. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just didn't sleep well last night." Kayla gave her a sympathetic look. "Well, you better snap out of it. We've got a math test next period." Amara nodded, trying to focus, but as she glanced up again, she caught sight of something that made her heart skip a beat. A man stood outside the school fence, his hands in his pockets, watching the students. He was tall, dressed in dark clothing, and he didn't look like anyone Amara recognized. She stared at him for a moment, her stomach twisting with fear. But before she could say anything, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. "Amara, what's wrong?" Kayla's voice snapped her back to reality. Amara shook her head, her heart racing. "Nothing. I just thought I saw something." She didn't say anything more, but the encounter left her shaken. Was it just her imagination? Or was the man somehow connected to the black SUV? Clarence's decision. Taking action. Back at his house, Clarence paced the floor, the police officer's warning ringing in his ears. He couldn't just sit by and do nothing. Amara had become like a granddaughter to him, and the thought of something happening to her filled him with dread. He decided to take action. First, he called Amara's mother, Lisa, to let her know about the police visit and the black SUV. Lisa was understandably worried, but like most single mothers, she was already juggling too many problems at once. She promised to be careful, but Clarence could tell that she didn't fully grasp the gravity of the situation. Next, Clarence made a decision that surprised even himself. He would go to Amara's school and keep an eye on her. He didn't trust the police to handle this on their own, and he couldn't sit at home knowing that someone was out there watching her. Clarence grabbed his coat and hat, his old joints protesting as he made his way out the door. He wasn't as young or as spree as he used to be, but he'd be damned if he let anything happen to that little girl. As he headed toward the school, a sense of determination settled over him. He would watch over her, protect her, and make sure that whoever was out there didn't get anywhere near her. But what Clarence didn't know was that the danger was already closer than he realized. Amara's walk home. A fateful moment. Later that afternoon, as the school day ended, Amara made her way home, trying to shake the uneasy feeling that had plagued her all day. She walked quickly, her eyes scanning the streets around her, searching for any sign of the black SUV. But the vehicle was nowhere to be seen. Just as she turned onto her street, a figure stepped out from behind a parked car. It was the man from earlier, the one she had seen outside the school. Amara's heart stopped as he walked toward her, a cold smile playing on his lips. Amara stood frozen as the man approached, his presence unsettlingly calm yet filled with silent menace. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her legs felt rooted to the pavement. Her heart pounded in her chest, a rapid, unsteady rhythm that echoed in her ears. Every step the man took seemed to draw out time, stretching seconds into hours. "Hey, kid," the man said, his voice smooth, almost too friendly. His smile widened as he got closer, revealing teeth that somehow seemed too white in the afternoon light. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just need to ask you something. It's about your friend, Mr. Clarence." Amara's stomach churned at the sound of his name. How did this man know Clarence? And why did his voice make her feel like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, one step away from falling into something terrible? I don't know you," Amara stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, I need to go home." The man's smile faltered for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "Come on, don't be like that. We both know old man Clarence is hiding something. I just want to talk to you about it. You've been spending a lot of time with him, haven't you?" Amara took a step back, the weight of his words pressing down on her like a physical force. He was trying to confuse her, to make her doubt Clarence, but she knew better. Clarence was kind, lonely maybe, but not dangerous. And yet, the way this stranger talked, it was as if he was trying to twist her thoughts, to make her question everything she believed about her friend. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice a little stronger now. "Clarence hasn't done anything wrong." The man chuckled, but it was a cold, humorless sound. "Sure, kid. Whatever you say. Just remember, I tried to be nice. If you change your mind, I'll be around." And with that, he turned and walked away, disappearing down the street with the same casual menace with which he had arrived. Clarence's arrival. A narrow escape. Unbeknownst to Amara, Clarence had been watching the entire encounter from the end of the street. He had arrived at the school just in time to see her leave, and his heart had raced when he noticed the man approaching her. The moment the stranger had spoken to Amara, Clarence's protective instincts had kicked in, and he had hurried forward, his old joints protesting every step. But something in the man's posture had stopped him from intervening immediately. Clarence had been a soldier once, long ago, and his instincts had told him that this man wasn't just a random stranger. He was calculating, dangerous. Clarence could see it in the way the man carried himself, in the casual confidence that masked something much darker beneath the surface. When the man finally walked away, Clarence rushed to Amara's side. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, but she managed a small, relieved smile when she saw him. "Clarence," she whispered, her voice trembling. "That man. He was asking about you." Clarence's blood ran cold. "Did he hurt you? Did he touch you?" Amara shook her head, her small hands clutching the strap of her backpack tightly. "No, but he said you were hiding something, that you were in trouble." Clarence felt his throat tighten. Trouble. The word echoed in his mind like a distant warning bell. He hadn't been in trouble for years, not since his time in the military. But this felt different. This was personal. And now, Amara was caught in the middle. "We need to get you home," Clarence said, his voice steady despite the growing storm of fear in his chest. "Come on, sweetheart. I'll walk with you." As they made their way down the street, Clarence kept a watchful eye on their surroundings, scanning every parked car, every corner for signs of the black SUV or the man who had just walked away. But the street was empty. For now, at least. The revelation. Clarence's past unveiled. That evening, after making sure Amara was safely back in her apartment with her mother, Clarence returned to his own home. The sense of dread that had settled over him during the day had deepened, and he knew he couldn't keep avoiding the truth. The man who had approached Amara wasn't just some random thug. He had known too much about Clarence, had spoken with too much familiarity. Sitting at his kitchen table, Clarence stared at the old photo that had been tucked away in his wallet for decades. It was a faded image of him in his youth, standing with a group of soldiers. The photo had been taken just before they were deployed overseas, back when he was young and strong and full of fire. But there was something else in the picture, a face that made Clarence's stomach twist. The man from the SUV. Back then, his name had been Daniel Royce. He had been part of Clarence's unit, a fellow soldier who had served alongside him in the war. But Daniel had been different, reckless, cruel. He had a way of twisting orders, pushing the limits of what was allowed, and finding pleasure in the suffering of others. Clarence had always suspected that something wasn't right with him, but it wasn't until the final days of their deployment that everything had come to light. During a covert operation, Daniel had gone rogue, disobeying direct orders and causing the deaths of innocent civilians. Clarence had been the one to report him, and as a result, Daniel had been court-martialed and sent to prison. Clarence had tried to put it behind him, but Daniel had never forgiven him. And now, after all these years, he was back. The plan, preparing for the worst. Clarence's hands trembled as he set the photo down. Daniel had always been vindictive, and if he had tracked Clarence down after all these years, it meant he was out for revenge. But why was he targeting Amara? What did she have to do with any of this? Clarence's mind raced as he considered the possibilities. Daniel must have been watching him for weeks, maybe even months, learning his routine, identifying the people in his life. And when he saw how close Clarence had become with Amara, he must have decided that she was the perfect way to get to him. Clarence stood up, his body moving on autopilot as he began to prepare. He locked all the doors and windows, double-checking every lock to make sure they were secure. He grabbed his old service revolver from the safe in the closet, the cold metal a familiar weight in his hand. It had been years since he had fired a gun, but he hadn't forgotten how. He couldn't let Daniel hurt Amara. He couldn't let him take away the one thing that had brought light back into his life. Amara's suspicion, a dark realization. Meanwhile, Amara lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with thoughts of the man who had approached her. Something about the way he had spoken about Clarence had unsettled her deeply. What could Clarence possibly be hiding? He was just an old man, lonely and kind. He couldn't be involved in anything dangerous, could he? The man's words echoed in her mind. We both know old man Clarence is hiding something. Amara's brow furrowed as she recalled her conversations with Clarence. He had mentioned once, in passing, that he had been in the military, but he had never gone into detail. What if there was more to his past than he had let on? What if the man in the black SUV knew something she didn't? She couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. The world felt different now, darker, and though she wanted to trust Clarence, the uncertainty gnawed at her. Daniel's next move. The trap tightens. As the night deepened, Daniel Royce sat in the driver's seat of his black SUV, parked in a secluded alleyway not far from Clarence's house. His eyes were fixed on the small glowing screen of his phone, where he was reading the latest reports on Clarence. The old man had always been too noble for his own good, always doing what he thought was right. It had been infuriating back then, and it was infuriating now. But this time, Clarence wouldn't be able to hide behind his principles. This time, Daniel had the upper hand. He had studied Clarence's life, watched the people he cared about, and now he was ready to strike where it would hurt the most. Amara was just the beginning. He had waited years for this moment, years to make Clarence pay for what he had done. And now, the game was finally in motion. Amara woke to the sound of frantic knocking on the door. It was still dark outside, and for a moment, she thought she was dreaming. But the knocking persisted, louder and more urgent, rattling the entire apartment. Her heart raced as she sat up in bed, trying to make sense of the noise. Amara, Amara, open the door. It was Clarence's voice. She jumped out of bed and rushed to the door, her hands trembling as she unlocked it. Clarence stood in the hallway, his face pale and drenched in sweat. There was a wild look in his eyes that she had never seen before, and the sight of him like this made her stomach twist in fear. "We need to leave," he said, his voice hoarse with urgency. "Now." Amara stared at him in confusion. "What's going on? Why are you?" "There's no time to explain. It's not safe here." Clarence glanced nervously down the hallway as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. "Please, Amara, you have to trust me." The escape. Without further explanation, Clarence grabbed her hand and pulled her out of the apartment. They moved quickly, rushing down the stairs and out into the street. Amara's heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of fear and confusion clouding her thoughts. She had never seen Clarence like this, so frantic, so desperate. Something terrible was happening, and she didn't understand it. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice shaking as they hurried through the empty streets. "Somewhere safe," Clarence replied, his grip on her hand tightening. "We can't stay here. Not with him out there." Amara's mind raced as they walked. Him. She knew who Clarence was talking about. The man from the SUV. The one who had approached her. The one who had been watching Clarence. Her fear deepened. "Clarence, who is he? Why is he after you?" Clarence didn't answer right away. They rounded a corner and slipped into a dark alleyway. For a moment, the only sound was their labored breathing and the distant hum of the city at night. Then, Clarence stopped and turned to face her, his expression pained and full of regret. "I didn't want you to get involved," he said softly. "This is all my fault." The confession. Clarence's darkest secret. Amara stared at him, her fear mixing with a growing sense of dread. "What are you talking about? What's going on?" Clarence took a deep breath, his hands trembling as he spoke. "The man who approached you. His name is Daniel Royce. We served together in the military a long time ago. He wasn't a good man, Amara. He did terrible things. Things that got innocent people killed. And I was the one who reported him. He was court-martialed because of me, and he's never forgiven me for it." Amara's eyes widened as the pieces began to fall into place. "So he's trying to get revenge on you?" Clarence nodded. "Yes, and he's not just after me. He saw how much I care about you, and now he's using you to get to me." Amara's heart sank. She felt sick to her stomach, the weight of the truth crashing down on her. Clarence had been trying to protect her all along, but now, because of Daniel, she was in danger too. The thought of it made her feel powerless, like a pawn in a game she didn't fully understand. "We have to leave town," Clarence said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "He won't stop until he gets what he wants." The standoff. Confrontation with Daniel. Before they could move any further, a shadow fell across the alleyway, and Amara's breath caught in her throat. Standing at the entrance was Daniel Royce. He was alone, but the sight of him sent a wave of terror through her. His eyes gleamed with malice, and a cold, predatory smile spread across his face as he took a step toward them. "Well, well," Daniel said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Isn't this a touching scene? The old man and his little friend, running away like scared rabbits." Clarence stepped in front of Amara, shielding her with his body. "This is between you and me, Daniel," he said, his voice cold and steady. "Leave her out of it." Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, Clarence, you always did have a soft spot for people, always trying to do the right thing, even when it wasn't your place. But you see, that's the problem. You've always been weak." Amara could feel Clarence's tension radiating off him, but he didn't back down. "You've already done enough damage, Daniel. It's over." "Is it?" Daniel's smile twisted into something more sinister as he pulled out a gun from his jacket. Amara's heart stopped as the barrel gleamed in the dim light of the alley. "Because it looks to me like it's just getting started." Time seemed to slow as the situation escalated. Amara's fear gave way to a cold, determined clarity. She couldn't just stand by and let this happen. Without thinking, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. dialing 911 as discreetly as she could. Daniel's eyes flickered toward her, his expression darkening. "What are you doing, girl?" Amara's hand shook as she held the phone behind her back, hoping the operator could hear enough to send help. "Nothing," she whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel sneered, raising the gun higher. "You think you can outsmart me? Do you really think help will get here before I finish what I came to do?" But before he could act, there was a sudden shout from the entrance of the alley. "Drop the weapon." Police officers swarmed in, their guns drawn and pointed at Daniel. The sound of sirens filled the air as more squad cars pulled up, their lights flashing in the dark. Daniel's face contorted with rage, but he knew he was cornered. Slowly, he lowered his gun, his eyes filled with hatred as the officers moved in to arrest him. The aftermath. Healing the wounds. The days following Daniel's arrest were a whirlwind of police reports, questioning, and relief. Clarence had been exonerated from any wrongdoing in his past, and Daniel Royce was finally facing justice for the crimes he had committed, both in the war and afterward. Amara had been hailed as a hero for her quick thinking in calling the police, but she didn't feel like one. She was just grateful that it was over, that the nightmare had finally come to an end. Clarence, on the other hand, had a harder time moving on. The events of the past few days had stirred up memories he had long buried, and it took time for him to find peace. But through it all, he remained close to Amara, their bond stronger than ever. They continued their birthday dinners, but now they were filled with laughter and joy, freed from the shadow of fear that had once loomed over them. A community transformed. The story of Amara and Clarence quickly spread through the town, becoming a symbol of resilience, courage, and the power of friendship. People who had once passed Clarence on the street without a second glance now smiled and waved, acknowledging the quiet strength he had shown. And Amara, once a shy and introverted girl, found herself stepping into a new role in the community, someone who had stood up in the face of danger and emerged stronger for it. The community, once disconnected and indifferent, was now more united than ever. Neighbors who had barely spoken before began looking out for one another, offering help and support in ways they hadn't before. Clarence and Amara had reminded them of the importance of human connection, and that sometimes it's the smallest acts of kindness that can have the biggest impact. Reflection. The question left behind. As the months passed, Amara often found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. She thought about Clarence, about Daniel, about the choices they had made that led them down such different paths. And she thought about herself, how she had been thrust into a situation that had forced her to grow in ways she hadn't expected. But the one question that lingered in her mind, the one that she couldn't quite shake, was whether people could truly change. Daniel had been consumed by his hatred, his desire for revenge. But Clarence had changed. He had found a way to heal, to move forward. Amara wondered if, given the right circumstances, even someone like Daniel could have found redemption. It was a question she didn't have an answer to. But it was a question she wanted to ask others, to see what they thought, to hear their stories and their opinions. As she sat down to write her thoughts, she found herself crafting a final message to the viewers who had followed her and Clarence's journey. Do you think people can change? Have you ever known someone who did? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And with that, she hit send, knowing that the conversation would continue long after the story had ended.